some of the earlier in my career, when I was starting to think more about being innovative as an engineer, failure and mistakes are like they're really to be avoided. You know, people can get hurt, equipment can get damaged, and so earlier in my career, I was very much I was always wanting to avoid any mistakes and doing everything that we could to avoid them. And so when I started doing more of the innovation and especially working with founders and startups, it quickly became apparent that if you were doing so much analysis and you were taking you were being so risk averse that you never made any mistakes, it too often meant that it was because you weren't doing anything. Like you were just, you got all caught up in this, paralysis by analysis is one of the phrases that you sometimes hear, where you just spend the whole time worried about things going wrong and doing the scenario analysis and never actually doing anything. And so for me, some of the early for me becoming conscious of the fact that failure and mistakes was not always a bad thing, that was really useful. And I definitely want all of the listeners to think about that. It's not about just going out and being reckless and crazy and just making just ridiculous mistakes all the time, but it's absolutely about the 80-20 almost, pushing yourself to get something done or to release something when it's maybe a well-developed first draft rather than something really polished and perfect. And so being more comfortable with the fact that it's not perfect, but you put it out into the world and then you actually get feedback on it. And so what you might have thought was a mistake or a failure because it wasn't perfect, you actually find is a really great way to start a collaboration and a conversation. And so that was certainly one of the big sort of insights for me. The other ones, in terms of early mistakes, sometimes it was around relationships, and so for your school years and then your university years and even your early years in a career, sometimes the people that you work with can be maybe a lot like you. And then for me, one of the things that was big mistakes for me was in the relationship stuff, where I would be either asking people as a frontline manager or a manager earlier in my career, I would be asking people to do things in a way that I would have been comfortable with, but it was really confronting or even sometimes distressing for them. And so, that being conscious of the fact that everybody learns differently, everybody has different work preferences. Earlier, I was thinking about the work preferences thing because the being creative and trying to find new ways to do things. Not everyone is necessarily, like, creativity is not necessarily a strength. And so there's some really great profiles that you can do, some really simple tests online. I think there's one even called 16 personalities maybe, but it just helps you to understand that everybody's different. And that was one of the big mistakes that I made. I once did an assessment as a manager early in my career, and out of 16 questions or 16 scenarios, I basically was judged to have done the right thing in 3 of them, because I was looking at every situation as if it was a nail and as if I had a hammer. And so I was really narrow in how I thought about managing people and solving problems. And so it was this big confrontation to say, you really need to realize that situations are different and you need to be able to manage and lead differently because people are different and situations are different. So certainly I continue to make mistakes all the time, but I'm not worried about making mistakes anymore, because I know that now they can be, if I'm not making mistakes, I'm not trying hard enough, I'm not being creative enough, and if I do make mistakes, then more often than not, it's a great way to start a new conversation and maybe new collaboration. So I've changed my perspective on failure and mistakes quite significantly since I was an engineer fresh out of university.